This episode is brought to you by Moonpig. Iconic milestones call for iconic cards.
100%.
And it doesn't get much more iconic than Moonpig. They offer over 30,000 cards you can personalize with photos, messages, videos, even voice notes.
And as someone who lives for a voice note, being able to record a message and add it to a printed card with a QR code is game-changing.
Head to moonpig.com and use the code BIGSMALLTALK for 50% off your first card. Hi, I'm Hannah.
And I'm Sarah.
And this is Big Small Talk.
This is the podcast where we try to cover the entirety of the news cycle, from the serious to the frivolous, all in one place.
Because loving pop culture doesn't mean you don't understand politics.
And today we're talking about Diddy's trial verdict, Trump's big beautiful bill, and Alligator Alcatraz, Poison Mushroom Lady trial verdict, Victoria childcare offender, and Jeanette McCurdy's show announcement.
But before we begin today's episode, we would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're recording today, the Gadigal people, and pay our respect to elders past and present.
Before we get into the actual news, Hannah, what is your personal headline for the week?
I feel like I haven't done much over the weekend. Had a really nice weekend, went to the footy, went out for drinks, had all the normal things at home. But today, excitingly, my live national tour is going on sale at 11 a.m. So by the time you're listening to this, all the tickets are on sale if you go on Instagram to Cheek or my personal profile, which is pretty exciting because I feel like I've had a quiet week, but this has been like the lead up to this. I've been preparing for this, and the tour is around the country in October. So I'm really excited about it.
That's so exciting.
It is really exciting. But yeah, no, I feel like I've had a lovely quiet week, but otherwise this is a big moment for professional me. So that's really exciting. What's your personal highlight of the week?
Honestly, the most exciting thing that's happened this past week, and I did actually tease this a little bit on my personal stories, but I got the chance to interview Alison Williams for Small Talk, which, if you don't know who that is, you would have definitely have seen her in something, I would say. For anyone that is sort of late 90s millennial as well, and you watched Lena Dunham's Girls on HBO Max.
Iconic show.
Iconic show. And it's like one of those things I think I've mentioned on the podcast a bunch of times. Like, it's either Fleabag or Girls. I think it is like mandatory viewing. Is one of the best TV shows ever. And she plays Marnie in it. Yeah. So I got to meet and interview Marnie. And she also is the star of Jordan Peele's movie Get Out.
Yes.
Which is one of the best movies. It is so good. It was 2018 and it got a bunch of Oscar nominations. It was like Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay. Like, such a good movie. And then also she's the new Megan star and producer of Megan movie, which is 2.0 out now, which I actually got to go watch at Universal Studios, which was really fun. But Girls would be my comfort show. So to actually meet her was crazy. That was like my first like Hollywood interview. So that's out next Thursday. So I'm very excited.
It's very exciting. And it's a big day of news today. So should we get into the...
Oh my God.
It's a big one.
It's huge. All right, let's do it. Sean Diddy Combs has been acquitted on the most serious of charges, racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking, but the jury has found him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. I have so many thoughts on this. I will just say, hearing the verdict, Diddy actually started praying, his lawyers fist pumped, the gallery mostly cheered. You're just sort of like watching it and hearing about it in the podcast I listened to this morning, and I'm like, wow, when are bad things going to happen to bad people? The verdict sort of spares him from a mandatory 15-year sentence and the possibility of life in prison, which is tied to those most serious charges, but he still faces up to 10 years for each of the 2 counts on which he was convicted, meaning he could spend up to 20 years behind bars still. The sentencing hasn't been scheduled yet. Diddy remains in custody and he will wait for the next phase of the case. He has been denied bail. I was listening in this podcast this morning and they were talking about how when they were still deliberating, or the judge was still deliberating if he was going to grant him bail or not, they heard from one of Cassie's references and he was like, I feel in danger if he was to walk. Like, yes, he wouldn't be able to, he'd have to turn his passport in and would have to do drug testing and he'd have to there would be a lot around it. But everyone was like, no, that would be really dangerous to so many people that have been involved in this case. And so the judge denied him bail and apparently you could see Diddy's jaw drop. And his lawyers immediately arced up and were like, oh, that's not fair. And the judge turned around and said, you have said in your own words multiple times throughout this case that he is violent.
Yep.
And they were like, oh, well, we were just doing that. And he was like, no.
You don't get to do that.
No. You have admitted this is a very dangerous, violent person. But it's just the audacity that they would even be shocked by that. However, his time in custody before the trial, the waiting for his sentencing will actually be included in his sentencing time. So we'll wait and see how long that will actually be. Still a question whether it'll be concurrent or if they'll take place after each other. But yeah, as you can imagine, the reaction to this was grief. And a lot of people pretty sickened and outraged that he won't actually be spending that long behind bars. On the other side of the algorithm, though, celebrations. I see a lot of people speaking about how this was a trial by TikTok that favoured Diddy and how comment sections then popped off to support him. Fans gathered outside of the courtroom, as they did day in and day out throughout this entire thing, but they celebrated by spraying baby oil on themselves. Apparently, it was just the most outrageous spectacle to see.
I didn't know about that. That's fucking horrendous.
Yeah. And I know that the knee-jerk reaction to this, as mine was, to say, like, this is, not at all. But I also don't think the outcome should be minimized either. Yes, he was acquitted of the most serious charges, but he was found guilty on another 2, and he has been denied bail, and he will now also face a wave of civil lawsuits. And I understand why he might have been relieved and prayed in the carry-on. And yes, it could have been so much worse for him, but I still don't think his lawyers had the grounds to react the way they did, to walk out of the courtroom and sort of bask in cheers of Diddy fans and kind of present the outcome of the case as if he had been fully vindicated. Like they said, it's a great victory for Sean Combs and it's a great victory for the jury system. And that framing is so misleading because from the charges that Diddy was acquitted from, the only thing they're celebrating is he was acquitted from charges that were designed for prosecuting mafia leaders. Not for a case centered on a network of staff and enablers for the sexual demands of one man.
Yep. One of the questions I have for you actually around this is I don't quite get why they charged him with racketeering conspiracy if that was going to be so difficult to prove.
From what I understand, prosecutors brought racketeering conspiracy against Diddy as a way to sort of tie together a range of alleged crimes that would have otherwise needed to be tried separately in different states.
Yep.
So that's why they went, it's called RICO, that's why they went for it.
Really helpful to understand in the US system the difference between state and sort of federal legislation when we're talking about different crimes.
Yeah, the charge, the RICO charge, gave them leeway to introduce evidence that might have been admissible under narrower charges like sex trafficking alone. So that's why they went big with it. I read in the ABC they actually said racketeering allows you to bring in the bigger picture. This includes his lifestyle, his power, his anger issues, the way people had to obey him. It's a 360 view of the conduct. So to secure a conviction, prosecutors needed to prove a consistent pattern of racketeering activity, which is they allegedly included acts of kidnapping, arson, bribery, sex trafficking. So what RICO is short for is proving that Diddy was a criminal enterprise that allowed the prosecutors to connect him to a pattern of illegal activity to an organization operation.
And I think even hearing that, thank you for explaining it because it is confusing.
But it also explains why Cassie's testimony and the freak-offs that he operated were so important to this case, because what Cassie was able to do is give insight into not only her relationship with him, but how everything operated. And I think that was always going to be difficult to prove, but that's why his defense team focused on sort of confusing and tearing down Cassie's credibility, because that was key to the entire case. And so really what I think this whole case has proven more than anything is just how flawed and ill-equipped courts are and legal systems to deal with instances of coercive control and domestic abuse and survivor responses.
Yeah.
Really what this showed is people did not understand, I don't want to just blame the jurors and say they were against women or whatever it is, but I think it is just showing a misunderstanding of consent, of what abuse looks like, about fawning and how survivors react. And I think ultimately what's sad is that this acquittal on those specific charges now sort of distracts from the truth of it all, which is Diddy abused Cassie repeatedly for a number of years. His own team said repeatedly throughout the entire case, we own the domestic violence, direct quote. We get it. Like,
But the charges don't reflect that. The crimes he was charged for do not reflect the gravity of that abuse.
yeah, I just feel that outrage that these like lawyers strutted around the whole trial, because although yes, he could feel ashamed for like kicking his girlfriend as she was like motionless on the floor, they get to say, oh, well, he didn't get convicted for trafficking her. So he's mostly innocent, reputation brand restored, go on.
And this is what I mean. We can see a pattern of behavior, but the charges don't reflect actually the crimes within them. What sucks about this whole thing is the language is so minimizing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Even though there is
It's like he's still a bad person.
Yes.
Like that's what we know. But because he hasn't been done on these higher charges, it's like innocent. And it's like, no, he's fucking not.
And I think what's tough about these cases too is there are a lot of instances where people make mistakes in their past and they do bad things and they engage in abusive behavior and then they look to actually repair, rehabilitate, sort of repent for what they've done. This is not that. This is a person operating at a high level when it comes to repeated patterns of crime and abuse. And the hardest part is watching someone who like symbolizes the entirety of the justice system going, I've succeeded and I've won something here.
That's what's really tough about it. But I think that bullish tactic that his lawyers and Diddy shown, it works. Like we saw that with O.J. Simpson. We've seen that with Johnny Depp. We're certainly going to see it in the like the It Ends With Us drama. If that goes to court, like Diddy's lawyers wanted a trial by TikTok and they played to that the entire time. And I think that is fascinating that is the way of the future with these big celebrity cases.
Yeah, completely. And I guess that also leads me into a question about Cassie. So what about the footage of him assaulting her? We all have seen, a lot of us have seen those videos. Like, was that validated in this process?
Yeah, so we have all seen that video from CNN, but he wasn't on trial for the New York assault. So what we know is that Cassie, she had a civil suit, and that's what actually triggered this entire formal investigation. So she had allegations of assault that led to a very quick settlement of $20 million as soon as those documents became public. So it was a separate thing, and because of the settlement, it couldn't actually come into this trial, except to say that it paints a picture. But it wasn't actually the offense that was being trialed for.
Yep.
Because it was such a big settlement and because it triggered other people, it just kind of gave way for Diddy's lawyers to say, see, it's gold digging.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's worth mentioning that Cassie's civil lawsuit stated the reason she hadn't pressed criminal charges was because she had zero confidence in obtaining justice. To quote it, she recognised that she was powerless and that reporting Mr. Combs to the authorities would not alter Mr. Combs' status or influence, but would merely give him another excuse to hurt her. And that fear has been vindicated in all of this.
Absolutely, but also I think it's important to remember, I always have to bring this up because I think it's so important for people to be reminded of. Civil suits, right? When you do have a criminal trial, you're really looking at whether this person is going to prison or not. The burden of proof is beyond reasonable doubt. The jury has to find them guilty beyond reasonable doubt. When we look at a civil suit, that is when you are suing for like damages, which means potential money. And if I was a victim in this sort of a situation like Cassie, and also the burden of proof in a civil suit is the balance of probability, so which is more likely to have occurred. So it's a lower threshold. And if I was Cassie and I was saying, okay, I don't think he's going to be in prison for this. I don't think justice will be served. But I think there is an opportunity for me to access a sort of lower court with a lower threshold and seek to kind of reclaim some of the damage that's been caused to me. It's not about gold digging. It's about trying to reclaim some genuine loss, the psychological harm, the physical harm.
Because you also don't believe in the justice system.
No, you don't. And you think maybe if my life could be made comfortable because I know what's going to happen if I go through the other door that's going to be much harder for everyone.
Yeah.
I understand that choice. It's an easy choice,
and
actually.
And that's why it's just, again, proving how difficult this is to all prove in court, things like coercive control and domestic abuse. And I was listening this morning, there was an alternate juror that spoke to one of the media outlets and was like, oh, yeah, like we heard about the freak-offs, but all of it was actually quite tame. Like she kind of seemed like she could have been into it. And I think that is such an interesting insight to what people thought. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, like I don't think anyone is malicious in that. I just think it's a complete misunderstanding of like what, because like if you look at so much evidence that Cassie had. Another witness testified to violent, controlling behavior of him. Dawn Richards, the singer, had seen him kick Cassie when she was on the floor after attempting to hit her with a skillet. The makeup artist testified that she saw Cassie with a split lip. Cassie's former friend said that she was present when Diddy tried to break into her apartment with a hammer, and also that she once saw him drag Cassie down the corridor by her hair. Cassie's mom, Regina, told the court that Diddy had threatened to release sex tapes of her daughter. 2 men testified that they'd been paid to have sex with Cassie. And despite all of these testimonies and the real footage, the defense was able to counteract all of that with just a few examples of affectionate and consenting messages. As if to say, well, except for the times that she was obviously being beaten up and threatened, she was happily there. And that undermined the entire thing. And that's why I think there is such like a misunderstanding of this. Also, the defense, like Diddy, did not have a single witness of themselves. They only went after Cassie.
Yep.
So the prosecution, they actually did do one really good thing, which was they brought in an expert on coercive control to explain to the jury, like, fawning and the complexities that of a codependent relationship. But, like, that wasn't enough. And I really, when I was listening to this, I was like, why do people not understand it? Yes, it's people aren't educated, but also, is it just this human instinct to sort of self-flatter and say, well, I would never have got myself in that situation, like she could have just left? Also, I want to say, and I'm kind of getting to the end of this, but in the final weeks of the trial, I read that Diddy's son released an album named King Combs that included a track called Diddy Free. On the same day, his other son, Justin, was accused of participating in rape alongside of his father in 2017. His lawyers deny the accusations, but like stuff is now coming out against his own sons. From what I've read about this, and it's kind of coming back to what we were talking about before, but I think the tragedy in all of this is that Cassie didn't feel safe or supported enough to pursue criminal charges for domestic abuse. Because if she had done so, any resulting trial would have been able to center on the alleged violence and threats towards her rather than the more complex and less easily understood RICO charges. So that focus could have made it way more difficult for his legal team and his supporters to claim that he'd been fully vindicated and is innocent. And I think that's what's really tough in this.
This has been really good because I think I hadn't had a grip on this and why the certain charges were chosen. And I think that's the most difficult thing to understand. But also, I'm not sure if people listening feel the same, but this is so numbing. Like in the Trump era, it feels like the kind of right-wing swing after Me Too, and it just is so devastating to hear all of it.
The Cut wrote a really interesting piece about, is Me Too dead following this? And I think that's a really fair question. It's like, I wonder what would have happened if this case was a few years ago even. I think the only terrible thing that could happen next would be if, Trump tries to pardon him.
Yeah.
I don't actually know if that's possible. I mean, anything's possible, but surely not. This episode is brought to you by Moonpig. Now, I don't know about you, Hannah, but I feel like my friends and I are all entering our milestone era. It's not just birthdays anymore. The girlies are getting engaged. They're having babies. They're buying houses. They're moving overseas. They're getting promotions.
It is all happening. I mean, none of that is happening for me actually, but it is my birthday in a few weeks. So I am expecting cards. I love a good card and I love keeping all my really meaningful cards. So this is
the hint for me to get you a card.
Hint, 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 Sarah, please. I love a card.
I love cards. I'm a big fan of having a meaningful card. If I open a card and it just says happy birthday, love, I'm like,
boring.
Friend of mine. Yeah.
But I did last year get a card for a friend who went through a breakup. It was a congratulations card. And it really, I think she still has it. I think it's framed somewhere. And I'm proud of that.
So whatever the milestone, Moonpig helps you celebrate it properly with over 30,000 card designs that you can personalize.
These are the cards people will actually want to keep.
So if there's someone you want to celebrate or a big moment or a small moment, send them a little surprise in the post with Moonpig.
And use the code BIGSMALLTALK at moonpig.com for 50% off your first card. Trump has passed his one big, beautiful bill. And if you have a beating heart, it's one big fucking evil bill.
I can't wait for you to explain this.
This is a massive piece of legislation that has been made law. I think a lot of people think it's something that's about to happen or at risk of happening. No. The goal for Trump, his self-appointed deadline for this bill was the 4th of July weekend, which has just occurred. And that's Independence Day in America, the 4th of July. Now, I actually wanted to start with a question to you because I think in my Instagram feed, 4th of July has looked a bit different this year. I haven't seen as many people, influencers I follow, people on TikTok talking about it. It seems to be almost a comparative, for different reasons, a comparative swing in conversation around celebrating what a country is on a particular day and what that means for the nation's identity. And I feel like it was just not a popular thing to kind of post any pride in America over the weekend.
No, I don't think so. I think the first thing I saw was Alex Earl clearly had done a photo shoot in a little bedazzled America outfit and said Happy 4th of July. And her comment section was slammed with, babe, read the room.
Yeah.
I also thought, like, it was interesting, the comparison of Trump's dozen tweets of fireworks and Happy 4th and the announcement that we're going to have a UFC match in the White House the following year. And then you compare that to Kamala, who was like, she didn't say Happy 4th. She said, like, I believe in our country, and I, like...
Yeah, hopeful message.
Hopeful message. Yeah, I think that was... It's so interesting to see that when July 4th is such a big deal over there.
Completely. So this bill passed just before that weekend. But what I want to explain about the One Big Beautiful Bill, you'll remember we discussed it quite briefly when we were talking about Elon Musk and Trump and Elon being incredibly against this bill for the purpose that at the core of this bill puts America into a further $3 trillion of debt.
So my question was, is the reason Doge happened entirely was just to make way for this bill?
I think the setup for Elon Musk was to come in and kind of cut spending, and his frustration and anger directed at Trump was, well, I've done all this slashing, which, again, we don't agree with the kind of slashing to the public service or what he has done, but he's done all this slashing to save the country money and put them in a better economic position, and then Trump's just going to make way for major tax cuts, and that's going to put the country further into debt. But to explain the kind of mechanism of the bill, to explain what it's really about, Trump wants to spend big on ICE, the military, and giving tax cuts which largely benefit the wealthiest in America. And where he's getting that money in this bill is by also making massive cuts to investment in climate action and in programs that help vulnerable groups. So the top line items here of what's going to happen in this bill is that $1 trillion will be cut from Medicaid over the next decade. Now, Medicaid, if you don't know, is the largest sort of health insurance program which provides medical and health services to low-income earners. So we're talking about pregnant women, people experiencing disability, people experiencing homelessness, low and middle-income earners. They often are accessing Medicaid. The bill also spends $170 billion on immigration. So this includes $46.5 billion to build Trump's border wall. It includes an increase to the ICE budget by, I think, $30 billion. There's different stats because people are including and kind of saying different numbers for different things. What we're really looking for is an ICE budget that's increased by about $30 billion US dollars, and that'll explain their employment, their facilities. Keeping in mind, I believe the ICE budget previously was something like $3.5 billion. So when I say increasing by 30, I don't just mean like, oh, it's going from, 40 to 70. I mean, it's going from 3.5.
Yeah.
That's huge change. And $45 billion will be spent on detention centres. Now, we're going to talk about Alligator Alcatraz a little later.
You know what's funny when you were saying that? Something I thought of was, I almost forgot, which sounds insane, but like the joke when Trump was first trying to be president was the build a wall. Yeah. And everyone was like, what the fuck is he talking about? But this is, the fact he's honing in on immigration is because that was his original through line.
Yes.
And he's just harping back to that because it worked then, and let's times it by 1,000 now.
Completely. It's terrifying. And also, I actually said this, I was doing a live stream for another publication, The Shot, on Sunday, and one of the things we were talking about is the way in which, I think I mentioned this at the time, the New York Times had a really interesting reel the other day which talked about we're entering the phase of normalization, where the hardest part is where we become desensitized to this, and we enter this new era of apathy and withdrawal because people can't handle the news cycle.
And that's actually the scariest part of this.
It is the scariest part. And also, it means in Australia we kind of become in certain ways complacent with our own government because we look at America and see disturbing imagery and disturbing policy passing, and we think, oh, this is okay then?
Or you just assume it can't be. I will get to Alligator Alcatraz, but one of the first things when I first started seeing images and footage and articles from it was I thought, surely I have this wrong. Even though I could see it in front of me and I was reading articles, I was like, I must, my brain almost couldn't quite compute it.
But your brain isn't designed to compute this, right? We are not designed to have this much information flow through to this level. So there is almost a sort of a dissociation and a compartmentalization immediately because you're like, I don't know how to process this when I have basic empathy.
Yeah. It was my thought process was, that can't be right. I'll come back to that.
Yeah. And then 3 hours later, you realize at the headline and you're suddenly seeing new fucking horrible things, and you've not even begun to process the thing about the last. Mm-hmm. Going back to some of the other investments, when I say he's investing $170 billion in immigration, that doesn't include the US military. That's a separate thing altogether. It's an additional $150 billion to the US military. SNAP, which is a program which provides food stamps for low-income earners, will also be changed in process. A lot of the things they're making alterations to is creating new obstacles for access. So saying like, for example, with SNAP, you have to complete a certain amount of hours of work in order to access, like whether it be voluntary or not, in order to access services.
Yeah.
And that creates a lot of barriers for people who may not actually be able to work or volunteer. So people sometimes who need it most then have to meet all these criteria and requirements. And you have to kind of, like a lot of with these Medicaid and SNAP sort of processes I've been reading about, you have to then like reapply every 6 months rather than every 12 months. So just creating access barriers to ensure that people are less likely to get the services they desperately need.
Which I think is really important to point out, because I think this is, and I know you'll talk about this in the tax cuts, but like the big beautiful bill is being posed as helpful to low and middle income earners.
Yeah.
And it's not.
It's not. And that's exactly what I'm going to talk about. So and it confused me at first. When I read about the tax changes, I thought a lot of these are good measures. So you might think things like, for example, there's going to be tax deductions that are $1,000 for individuals, $1,500 if you're the head of a household, which is sort of weird.
Strange.
It's strange, isn't it? $2,000 for married couples. Another big change that sounds really good for low-income earners is like writing off income from tips and overtime pay. So you're thinking, okay, like if I'm working in hospitality and I'm getting paid in tips and that's how it all works for me, like you're actually having sort of no taxation on parts of that earning, right? So sounds net good. But again, when we contrast that against actually who is benefiting from this bill, I read in the Daily Oz's post about this one big beautiful bill that analysis from the University of Pennsylvania showed that the top 10% of income earners will receive 80% of the legislation's total value. Because when we look at who the tax cuts benefit, you can look at a low-income household and say, oh, it's about $700 or $1,000. But then you look at how it benefits someone who's earning over $200K and what the tax cuts mean for them.
It's like everyone's getting something from the workers, but it's so disproportionate.
Absolutely. And again, it sounds positive, but when you actually look at what's happening for Medicaid and these sorts of things.
And then what's getting cut to allow that at all. Yeah.
Another one that's really important to mention, has been falling off a lot because there's so many elements here, is abandoning incentives for green energy. So what this bill does is it phases out tax incentives that Biden introduced that encourage people to buy an electric car, to invest in solar for their household.
We did speak about, but we spoke about it in the terms of that's what Elon Musk got annoyed about.
Yes.
Because he was like, no, my
not
Teslas.
my cars. And that's so important to mention. He was doing it for self-serving reasons. And he was doing it because he was like, well, I've saved money and I like electric vehicles because I make them.
Yeah.
And again, even a broken clock strikes right twice a day or whatever that fucking saying is, it's perfect. That's kind of like Elon Musk here. We can disagree with all of his positions, but understand that electric vehicles are a net positive, right? So these are gone. These things that encourage people and incentivize people with subsidies for investing in upgrades for their homes and their appliances are now eliminated. This is lethal. This will, and also like, I think we could go, okay, cuts to programs. No, this is the death of sick children. This is early death for a lot of older people who need access to healthcare.
And this is all to make way for funding for things like Alligator Alcatraz.
And thank you for segueing perfectly, because you'll see Alligator Alcatraz everywhere, but as we said before we started recording, this is a concentration camp.
Yeah.
Let's like use the language of what this actually is.
I know people might listen to that and think that sounds extreme.
No.
It's actually not when you look into like the definitions of it.
Yeah, and if he's able to, and when I say achieve, I mean it in the most heinous sense, if he's able to sort of succeed with all of these policy platforms in the first 6 months of his presidency, imagine what the entire term is going to look like. We need to actually start using this language before it gets to the point where it's too late.
So Alcatraz, am I right in saying that this was a prison that was sort of abandoned?
Yes.
Or have they built this new?
It's being described more as like a tent camp.
Okay.
So it's going to kind of be expanded. Right now, I believe as of this week, it's holding 1,000 detainees. But I also want to note, actually at the top of this, when we talk about detention facilities and we feel like it's very separated from ourselves, because this is what it is. Alligator Alcatraz is in the Florida Everglades, and it's a detention facility being set up for immigrants that have been kidnapped by ICE, basically. But when we talk about this and we think it's some faraway dystopian concept, Australia mastered this model. Our country,
we just did it offshore.
But that's what he's trying to, he's trying to create an environment, yes, but he also does this offshore. The thing to come back to is we are no better in this, as both the Liberal and Labor governments successively for decades now
have
created these
Nauru.
facilities they have spent huge amounts of money on these facilities, and they have shipped people trying to flee as refugees, as asylum seekers, and come to a safe place to have families, to work, and we have placed them in detention facilities offshore.
I think that is such a good point to make, because if you're reading this and rightly outraged, you should also be outraged at our own government.
Completely. So going back to Alligator Alcatraz now, last Tuesday, Trump actually toured this facility, and it's basically being celebrated by Trump for harsh conditions and difficulty to escape because of the alligators. Now, it's a tented camp where temperatures generally average in the high 30s Celsius. So I think it's like a 37.8 degrees Celsius average. So extremely hot, mosquito infested, snakes, alligators everywhere. What did Trump say about it?
I'm actually going to play it.
You know, the snakes are fast, but alligators are big. We're going to teach them how to run away from an alligator, okay? If they escape prison. How to run away. Don't run in a straight line. Run like this. And you know what? Your chances go up about 1%.
He's instructing as a joke how these people can run away from an alligator the safest way, but the chances of surviving that would only go up 1%.
And laughing. Arguably worse than this is the merchandise they're selling to celebrate Alligator Alcatraz.
That is what I saw, and I thought, surely not. That's misinformation. They are selling a fucking merch line.
They're selling a fucking merch line to celebrate the detention, prison, concentration camp facility where the people escape and will be eaten by alligators.
And the fucking footage of them touring, and they're saying stuff like, and we'll be welcoming our detainees next week. What? What are you saying?
Absolute insanity. And it's also going to cost them $450 million US per year to run. I want to talk about the different areas of backlash. There's so many people working and fighting so hard against this. And one of the quotes I want to read is from Thomas Kennedy, who leads the Florida Immigrant Coalition. And he was reported in The Guardian as saying that this is a facility designed to enact suffering. And he said they picked the most controversial site possible, right in the Everglades, using language like the alligators and the snakes, making it seem like it's going to be a medieval castle with a moat. But also, clearly a position here which is we are protecting immigrants' rights. Then there's a series of other arguments being put forward here. One is the environmental arguments about the damage it will do to put a facility like this here to the environment that they live in. It's Everglades, right? Then there's also the indigenous groups who are saying this is our ancestral land.
It's a sacred site.
This is a sacred site, absolutely. And so we've got all of this backlash, but I also want to talk about then what Trump had to say about the farmers.
This was frightening because it's one of those things that you sort of have to sit on and then go, wait, what is the meaning of what he just said? So essentially, from what I understand, is the farmers have been pretty upset about this because a lot of undocumented workers were working on farms. And so ICE has come and taken them or is threatening to take them, and they're going, well, we need our workers, so now we're mad. And Trump has pretty much come back and said, you know, I'm the guy that's tough on immigration, but I'm also big on farmers. So what he suggested in vague terms was sort of a system that would allow those undocumented workers to stay on farms or in hospitality businesses. And he said, we're going to have a system of signing them up so they don't have to go. They can be here legally. They can pay taxes and everything. But then he added that the farmers would be responsible for the immigrant laborers and they would not receive citizenship. So to break down what that means, he's saying, oh no, they can stay and work. I'm going to make the farmers responsible for them.
Oh, he used the language of ownership too.
Farmer ownership.
What does that sound like?
Personal ownership.
Slavery.
Modern slavery.
Slavery.
You're not offering citizenship. You're forcing them to work and you're making them the responsibility of another human with zero other rights.
And also, there is the slavery label here which must be used. But at a baseline below that, there is the consideration here. The only way that these people are spoken about by Republicans, by Trump, by these farmers is through the lens of economic value rather than humanity. And I feel like every week we get on this microphone and we just get so arced up about this, but it's actually, I feel like such a need to do this because it is so validating to talk with my friends about this and go, you read the headlines and it feels just like so dystopian, but to sit here and go, he's talking about slave ownership.
He's talking about humans being responsible for other humans so that they can work and then saying, oh, but you can still pay taxes.
In some optimistic, hopeful news that I want to mention, 2 environmental groups have filed a lawsuit in the federal court this week trying to stop this. But I also, even in response to that,
how is that gonna...
well, I think what I want to say about that is there are a lot of lower courts in America who are working to try and put in place injunctions, try to stop him at every level from a lot of what he's doing with these deportations, and generally beyond that, the changes Trump is trying to enact.
I mean, that is good, but also isn't that also why he's chosen Florida of all places?
It is, but the problem actually is bigger than that nationally, in that if he wants something to happen bad enough, he will take it to the Supreme Court. It will eventually get there. You know, he'll appeal and appeal and appeal as much as he can. And he stacked the bench. He stacked the bench in his first term, and it's a conservative-leaning bench. There is no separation of powers in America. This is not a democracy. This is a fascist state. And it's just hard to look at it with any optimism right now.
The jury, after 6 days of deliberation, has found Erin Patterson guilty on 3 counts of murder and 1 on attempted murder. Oh my fucking God.
Just a normal news week again.
Oh my God. I was actually really shocked to read. I mean, like, Erin Patterson is the poison mushroom lady, also known as. This is a case we've been following since 2023 now. And yeah, the Supreme Court has found 50-year-old Erin guilty of murdering 3 family members by intentionally adding death cap mushrooms to a beef Wellington lunch in 2023. To paint the scene, from what I've read about what happened the day this verdict was given, is as Erin walked in, none of the jurors met her gaze. She was shallow breathing and sort of just staring at the ceiling. Outside of the court, about 200 people were gathered. When the verdict was read, she was actually fairly emotionless. She didn't really crack or show anything, but she just started blinking rapidly. And members of the public who managed to get inside the courtroom were then attempting to take selfies. And then they were being hauled out by detectives and being, threatened, told to delete until they'll be in contempt of court. Like an absolute spectacle. Mm-hmm. Erin had always denied the charges of murder and attempted murder, claiming that the mushrooms were accidentally used in the meal that she prepared for her in-laws, which were Don and Gail Patterson, Gail's sister Heather Wilkinson. Unfortunately, they died, and then Ian Wilkinson is who survived. That was Heather's husband. And to recap, over the 9 weeks, the jurors heard from more than 50 witnesses and were introduced to more than 120 exhibits from the prosecution and the defense. And a few of that actually came out this morning that we were able to see. There were some photos, even the beef Wellington. Essentially, the prosecutors told the jury that Erin had intentionally foraged for death cap mushrooms using locations that she had found on a nature site called iNaturalist, which was also in what we saw this morning.
Yeah.
Then there was she dehydrated the mushrooms, she ground them into a powder, and she secretly mixed it into the beef Wellington parcels and served it to her guests. To back up their claims, they presented the mobile phone tower data, digital evidence from devices taken from Erin's home, the testimony from Ian, the survivor, and they also just leveled that she did lie a lot. She lied about having cancer to get everyone to come to her lunch, faking an illness after the lunch, something like she ate a whole cake to try and make herself sick afterwards, and disposing of the food dehydrator containing the residue of the mushrooms. But the motive, this is why I'm surprised that she was found guilty, because beyond reasonable doubt, which is something I feel like we've said so many times in the last 2 weeks, it all doesn't mean anything unless you can prove that they have a viable motive. And the defense spoke about how these people were useful to Erin's life. Yes, she'd had problems with her in-laws, but they were amazing grandparents that were really close with her children and helped out with her children. And Erin loved her children. The ex-husband that she hated so much didn't even go to the lunch and said he wasn't going to go. So, why would you not wait until, the person you would want to go after was there? So, yeah, is that what you thought?
I thought she was going to be found guilty just because there was so much evidence that pointed. The thing about motive, I think, that we're mistaking here, my little 2 cents on this, is that in Australian criminal law, you have to combine the physical act of doing something with intent. But intent is slightly different to motive in the fact that if you can establish that there was a mental element here where she clearly, a lot of the evidence pointed to the fact that, she'd been factory resetting phones, that she'd gone and foraged for death cap mushrooms, that there was a clear string of intent.
I don't think she's a criminal mastermind.
No, but you know what I mean? I agree with the motive. It was confusing as to why she killed them and why they, or why she wanted to make them violently ill. But there was enough of the mental elements here to establish that there was some sort of planning or intention. Out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, honestly, when this all really happened, we were like, this seems pretty on the nose,
Yeah.
Erin. So maybe I wasn't surprised in that way, but I think I was still shocked. It seemed like such a crazy finale to all of this. I don't know why I thought that it wouldn't happen in the end.
I actually think, and I stand by this, I think we've said it before, I think this will be something in 5 to 10 years that will be revisited with a very different lens.
I think so too.
There's something
There's so much in it.
You know what? I feel like this is unfinished business. I think we've also obviously got sentencing and things to occur still, but for some reason there's something about this case that we're going to return to.
Yeah, I mean, the homicide detective, when he spoke in front of the court, was really just saying, like, we also do need to remember in all of this that 3 people did die.
Yeah.
I think that was a good reminder to all of us, to be honest, and to me, because I know I'm like, oh my God, this story. But my heart breaks for her 2 children.
Absolutely. I think another interesting point about this entire case, and again, I have been absolutely a participant in all of the sort of memes and content, because a lot of this has been just part of the Australian zeitgeist and part of the global view of Australia. But there's something gendered about this in the way that because it wasn't, in inverted quotations, like a violent murder, and it was quite a specific way of doing things, and because it was an older woman that committed the crime, the way meme culture's responded, the way Australians have responded has been different. And I think there's something interesting to comment on there, that because she doesn't look like a murderer, the way we've spoken about her and the deaths of these 3 people has been different.
Yes, it was because she didn't look like a murderer, but also all of it was just so absurd.
Yeah.
Like, it was an absurdity of it being so Australian at the same time. Like, it was the sleepy town and the beef Wellington, the alleged party with her friends the night before, like having a wine. There's something just so
mismatched
unrealistic.
plates, a dehydrator, foraging,
All the
mushroom
photos,
expert.
you just go, this is just so Australian.
I think it's what you're describing is like people have been able to fictionalize it in their minds.
It's like I could almost, it's like I knew her. It's like I could visualize, I could like taste the plate that came on. Like,
Completely.
Anyway, so there is still a possibility she could appeal the decision.
And I'm sure ABC Mushroom Case Daily podcast would like her to do that so they can continue doing a Mushroom Case Daily episode.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. A male childcare worker in Victoria has been charged with more than 70 crimes against children. Now, every story we've done today has been sensitive in a different way.
Horrendous.
So I think it's been a sort of trigger content warning across the whole episode, but this is obviously particularly awful. Last Tuesday, the public were informed that a 26-year-old childcare worker named Joshua Brown had been charged with more than 70 offences relating to 8 victims who were aged between 5 months and 2 years. Those charges include child rape, attempted child rape, and producing child abuse material. And this is a disturbing case, just puts it lightly, right? Like, I think this has shook the nation. And there are so many factors here, I think, which aggravate and amplify just how dangerous this person was. Joshua Brown worked at 20 childcare centres between early 2017 and May of this year. And all of that information has now been public for parents to kind of look through and see, if their child has attended any of these centres. There have been more than 2,500 families contacted about this. And also 1,200 children have been advised to undergo infectious disease screening. Now, again, I think I've been having so many horrendous conversations about this, but it's not public information what that screening involves, like what it's for. And that's not helpful to speculate on. Now, Joshua Brown notably had a working with children check. And a lot of people fairly are so confused as to how this can happen. But I think it's important to say from the outset, when we're talking about these checks, someone who has no history with police, no record, or even has an active investigation underway won't be picked up in this system. I have a working with children check. I got mine last year. It was a very simple application. Then I visited like a Service New South Wales centre. It's so simple to access. So unless you have a criminal record, it's not really going to be picked up or flagged. So one of the big responses to this is that last Wednesday, the Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen announced reforms to make quick changes to the sector to improve child safety. That includes a register of childcare workers, a ban on personal mobile phones being used in centres, and mandatory CCTV. If a centre doesn't comply with installing mandatory CCTV, they'll then face a fine of up to $50,000. So really harsh penalties for centres that don't actively change their systems. There's also an immediate pretty much announcement of a 6-week review into the sector. And the Premier of Victoria has also said they will accept those recommended changes and after that 6-week review is concluded. the federal government, and I know all the attorney generals from the states are going to meet with the federal attorney general, I believe, soon, but they've already committed to major national reform. Then that will include changes to that working with children system, and they're going to look at nationalising it, whereas right now it's a state-based system, to make it easier to kind of cross-check, to change the sort of like how these things are processed and what they flag. I think one of the only parts of this that needs to be conversed about, because obviously so much of this is heinous and we just need to allow these processes to be underway, is that so much of the media I've seen in the last week has focused on whether men, altogether, all men, should be removed from or banned from working in childcare centres. I think the people who are saying yes to that, that is an immediate reaction. I don't think it is the right reaction. I don't think it is the right approach to these changes. I actually think the governments at state and federal levels have done a good job in taking immediate action and looking at long-term reform. When we're talking about the conversation around men being banned, I don't want to sound like I'm making some sort of not all men argument here, but I think it is horrific given that, noting that over the last 12 to 18 months specifically, we've seen some particularly heinous, like high-level patterns of crime being committed in childcare centres, in swimming centres by men. And the vast majority of offending in these contexts is perpetrated by men. So I understand why this is a danger. There are also a lot of good men working in childcare centres, but I think that the sort of reaction that says no man should be able to work in childcare only reinforces the system of patriarchy.
Yeah, and I understand if you're a parent, you just would rather not take the risk, and I get that. But I do think, I don't think that is... I think that's ingraining something in our society that we wouldn't be able to reverse then.
Yeah, I completely agree with that statement. I think the idea that the solution is to remove men is not only a band-aid solution to the problem, it does say that all men are at risk. And in a way, because men are such a sort of small presence in childcare facilities already, I think also what this does is seek to just put more care labour, and that industry becomes more feminised, and it just seeks to communicate to women they have to take on more of the workload in these environments if you ban men from doing specific activities in these caring roles too, in these particular employment situations. But I think it communicates the wrong thing about how we move forward as a nation and how we make fundamental changes to the system and have adequate reform to ensure that no child is harmed by anyone.
Okay, we are now at the Q&A for this week, and a big thank you to Moonpig for being our sponsor again. And we have a question here by Lottie. It says, have you read Jeanette McCurdy's book? Do you know who Jeanette McCurdy is?
Yes, and I read the book.
Have you read it?
Yep.
I actually haven't read it, but for those wondering, she wrote the book I'm Glad My Mum Died, which sold something like 3 million copies.
It was on the NYT bestseller list for like a year. It was a huge book.
I really, really do want to read it. It's so Jeanette was a Nickelodeon star. She was in iCarly, Sam and Cat, Zoe 101, True, Jackson, VP, and also was in Victorious. It's really interesting because what I understand the book is about, her very complicated relationship with her abusive mother, but it also touches on her being a child star, mental health struggles, addiction, her recovery. It's just brutally honest, right?
Yeah, and I think I struggled a lot with how much of the disordered eating content was like sort of, and I get it, it's an honest memoir and it was a brilliant book, but it's quite confronting on so many levels.
Yeah. I think the reason Lottie has sent this in is because also this week it's been announced that Apple TV is going to pick this up and make this a TV show, and Jennifer Aniston's going to play her mum.
I saw this. 'Cause I only saw the poster with Jennifer Aniston and I was like, incredible to kind of frame it through the lens of the star being the mum. I'm really interested who plays Jeanette in this, and if they're like a debut star, basically.
I wonder. I think it's going to be really good. When I was looking into it, so Jennifer Aniston's one of the producers on it as well. Also, I saw Lucky Chap listed, which is Margot Robbie's company as well. And yeah, Jen is the only confirmed casting so far, so we'll wait and see. But I think this will be I really am excited to watch this.
Yeah, it'll be really good. I'm excited for it.
And thank you very much to Moonpig for sponsoring this Q&A. Okay, that is the end of the episode. Thank you so much to everyone who has listened this far. We know it was a big episode, but if you could leave a comment or a review or a rating, all of that is really, really helpful to us. And we'll see you next Tuesday.
See you next Tuesday. This episode is brought to you by Moonpig. Iconic milestones call for iconic cards.
100%.
And it doesn't get much more iconic than Moonpig. They offer over 30,000 cards you can personalize with photos, messages, videos, even voice notes.
And as someone who lives for a voice note, being able to record a message and add it to a printed card with a QR code is game-changing.
Head to moonpig.com and use the code BIGSmallTalk for 50% off your first card.